Lucky loved driving his taxi. Every day, he drove all around town, enjoying the sound of the engine and the feel of the road. His younger sister, Bolale, always joked with him, saying,
"Lucky, you love your taxi so much. I think you love it more than anything else."
Lucky just smiled because he knew how much he cared for his taxi. Every morning, Lucky had a routine. He woke up early, took a bath, got dressed, and ate breakfast. Then he drove to the petrol station to fill his tank, making sure he had enough fuel for the day. But one Monday morning, things didn't go as planned. Lucky woke up late. The sun was already shining brightly. He quickly got dressed and ran to his taxi. There was no time for a bath, no time for breakfast, and no time to go to the petrol station. "I'll get petrol later," he thought, hoping everything would be okay. Lucky started picking up passengers. First, he picked up a young man who was in a hurry to catch his bus. "Please hurry. I don't want to miss my bus," the man said. Lucky drove as fast as he could, reaching the bus stop just in time. The man quickly got out and ran to catch his bus. Lucky checked his petrol gauge. It was low, but there was still enough to keep going. Next, he picked up a teacher who was late for work. "Please hurry. The children are waiting for me," she said anxiously. Lucky sped towards the school, but the petrol gauge kept dropping. When they arrived, the teacher thanked him and rushed into the school. Lucky was worried now. The petrol was almost gone. "I need to go to the petrol station," he thought. But just then, a mother and her sick child got into the taxi. The mother looked very worried. "Please, my child is very sick. We need to get to the clinic quickly," she said. Lucky knew he had to help. He drove as fast as he could towards the clinic. But suddenly, the sky got dark and thick fog began to cover the road. Lucky could barely see where he was going, and the petrol gauge was almost empty. The red light was on, warning him that he was about to run out of fuel. Lucky's heart raced as he wondered how he was going to make it. As they were driving through the fog, Lucky noticed a strange glow in the distance. He squinted and saw an old, small petrol station that he had never seen before. It seemed to appear out of nowhere, with its lights shining brightly through the fog. Lucky hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should stop, but the petrol gauge was almost on empty, and he had no choice. He turned into the station and stopped next to the pump. An old man, with a kind face and a twinkle in his eye, came out to help. "Fill it up, please," Lucky said, feeling a little uneasy. The old man nodded and began filling the tank. As he did, Lucky noticed something strange. The petrol pump was making no sound. The old man finished, smiled at Lucky, and said, "You're good to go now. Take care." Lucky thanked the old man, still puzzled by what had happened. He drove back onto the road, the fog lifting as he got closer to the clinic. When they arrived, the mother rushed her child inside, grateful for Lucky's help. After dropping them off, Lucky turned back to look for the mysterious petrol station. But as he drove down the same road, the station was gone. There was nothing but an empty field where it had been. Lucky couldn't believe his eyes. "Did I imagine it?" he wondered. But when he checked his petrol gauge, the tank was full. He realized that something magical had happened, and it had saved him just when he needed it most. Sometimes, when we're in a difficult situation, help comes from unexpected places. We should always keep going, even when things seem impossible, because a little bit of magic might be waiting just around the corner. Once upon a time, in a peaceful village far away, there lived two peddlers named John and Mike. The two men were rivals, always competing for customers, because they sold the same kind of products: pots, pans, and jewelry. One day, they found themselves in a situation where they had to sell in the same village at the same time. Both were worried about how they could make enough money. "Mike," John said with a sigh, "we both sell the same things. How will we convince people to buy from us? They'll buy from you, and they won't have any reason to buy from me afterward." Just then, an old wise man who was passing by overheard their conversation. He had seen the two merchants many times before and knew they were both struggling.
"Why don't you two divide the village in half? John, you can sell your wares in one half of the village, and Mike, you take the other half. When you finish, you can switch places and try your luck in the other half. That way, you won't have to compete directly with each other.
Both men looked at each other and thought about the idea. That's a great plan. We'll do that, they agreed, and each set off toward their respective sides of the village. John began calling out as he walked down the streets. Jewelry and pots, gorgeous bangles. Come and see. He hoped to catch the attention of the villagers. Nearby, a little girl heard John's call and ran inside her small house. Grandma, there's a man selling beautiful bangles outside. Can you buy one for me, please? The grandmother shook her head sadly. Oh dear, I wish I could, but we don't have any money to buy such things. The little girl thought for a moment, and then her eyes fell on an old pot in the corner, covered in thick black soot. Grandma, what about that old pot? Maybe we can trade it for a bangle. The grandmother glanced at the pot. It had been sitting there for so long that she had forgotten about it.
That old thing? It's filthy and covered in grime. I don't think anyone would want it, but if it makes you happy, we can try.
The little girl ran out just as John reached their house, still calling. Jewelry and pots. Buy a bangle, let it dangle. Over here, the girl shouted. I want to buy a bangle. John looked at the little girl's ragged clothes and frowned.
I'm afraid you can't afford my bangles, little girl. Don't waste my time.
But you didn't even tell me the price, she exclaimed, determined. John laughed. All right then, 2 coins for 1 bangle. But I doubt you have 2 coins. The grandmother stepped forward.
We don't have any money, but we do have this old pot. Would you trade a bangle for it?
John sneered. That filthy pot? It's worthless. But curiosity got the better of him. He took the pot and rubbed the grime a little. To his surprise, a gleam of gold appeared beneath the soot. His heart skipped a beat. This is no ordinary pot. It's a golden pot, he thought to himself. But John, being a greedy man, decided to hide this discovery from the grandmother and the little girl. This pot is no good to me, John said, pretending to be disappointed. I don't want it. Goodbye. He turned and walked away, planning to come back later and trick them into giving him the golden pot for free. A little while later, Mike made his way to the same house, calling out, Jewelry and pots. Buy a bangle, let it dangle. The little girl, still eager for a bangle, ran outside again. Sir, we don't have any money, but we have an old pot. Would you trade a bangle for it? Mike smiled kindly at her. Let me see the pot, little one, he said. When he saw the old, grimy pot, Mike knew it wasn't worth much in its current state. However, he didn't want to disappoint the little girl. He gently rubbed the pot to get a better look at it, and to his shock, a gleaming gold shimmered beneath the soot. My goodness, Mike exclaimed. This is a golden pot. It's worth far more than just 1 bangle. The grandmother shook her head in disbelief. We're just poor folks, she said. We don't understand its true value. Please, take it and give my granddaughter the bangle she wants. Mike, being an honest man, shook his head.
No. This pot is worth far more than a simple bangle. Here, I'll give you all the pots, pans, and jewelry I have with me in exchange for this pot. I'll keep only 2 coins for myself, enough to cross the river.
The grandmother was overjoyed with the deal, and the little girl was thrilled to have not just 1 bangle, but plenty of beautiful new jewelry. They waved cheerfully as Mike left with the golden pot. Later that day, John returned to the house, thinking he would easily trick the grandmother and take the golden pot.
I've changed my mind, he said, trying to act generous. I'll take that worthless old pot, but I won't be able to give you a bangle for it.
We've already traded the pot to an honest peddler who gave us everything he owned in exchange. John's face turned red with anger. What? That was my golden pot. No, it was supposed to be mine, he shouted. He ran to the riverbank, hoping to catch Mike, but by the time he arrived, Mike had already crossed the river with the golden pot and all the riches. Once upon a time, in the center of a peaceful village, stood a grand, abandoned castle that had remained empty for countless years. Legends whispered that a giant once lived there, though no one in the village had seen him in ages. Still, the villagers respected the castle's quiet, timeless beauty and the enormous garden that surrounded it. Every day, children from the village would sneak into the garden to play, basking in the beauty and safety it offered. One sunny day, as the children frolicked under the trees, they shared the treats the garden gifted them.
Have you tasted these juicy peaches? Or the apples? They're so sweet.
The children laughed and giggled, marveling at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, chasing each other through the flowers, and making plans to return for strawberries the next day. The garden was a haven of joy, beauty, and laughter, a paradise where the children felt completely free. Then, one quiet afternoon, the castle's owner finally returned. The giant, tall and stern-faced, was pleased to see his garden thriving, thanks to the gentle care of Mother Nature. However, as evening approached, the giant's peace was disturbed by the sound of children laughing and playing outside. Curious, he went to his window and was furious to see so many young ones running around, treating his garden as their own. Enraged, the giant stomped out into the garden, startling the children, who froze in terror. "Get out of here, you little creatures," he bellowed. "You're ruining my lovely garden. This place is mine, not yours. Go away, and don't you ever come back." Panicked, the children scattered, racing home to tell their families about the terrifying giant. Relieved to be alone again, the giant returned to his castle, basking in the quiet that had returned. But the children couldn't stay away forever. After a few days, they snuck back, unable to resist the garden's allure. When the giant discovered them, he chased them away again, growing more and more irritated. Determined to keep them out for good, he decided to build a high wall around his garden, making it impossible for anyone else to enter. Seasons passed, and though the garden remained enclosed, it began to lose its splendor. Winter crept in, and the giant waited for spring, hoping to see his beloved flowers bloom once more. Yet when spring finally arrived, it brought no warmth or color to his garden. The flowers refused to blossom, and no fruit grew on the trees. The birds and butterflies were gone. The garden became barren, cold, and lifeless, just like the heart of its owner. Year after year, the giant watched in despair as neighboring fields bloomed in the spring, while his own garden remained a dry, desolate place. The giant grew lonelier and more frustrated, failing to understand why his once beautiful garden had become so bleak.
Why won't spring come to my garden? Why has Mother Nature abandoned me?
One chilly morning, the giant awoke to hear faint sounds of laughter coming from his garden. Rushing outside, he saw a group of children who had slipped through a gap in the wall. The giant's rage surged as he began to scold them, but something made him pause. Among the children was a tiny boy, struggling to climb a tree. Fearful and trembling, the child looked up at the giant and pleaded, "Please don't hurt me. I won't come back if you don't want me here." The giant felt a strange softness stir within him.
I won't harm you. Go ahead, call your friends. You can all play here.
The children's laughter filled the air, and to the giant's surprise, blossoms began to bloom on the trees, birds returned, and the garden came alive with beauty. From that day forward, the giant welcomed the children, sometimes even joining their games. He finally understood that the true beauty of his garden lay in sharing it. The once selfish giant became a beloved friend of the village, having learned that a garden's joy comes from the warmth it brings to others.